Did you know that MSR began as a humble mountaineering safety newsletter back in 1969? It was founded by an outspoken 53-year-old inventor, businessman, and mountaineer named Larry Penberthy. Larry was no average entrepreneur, though. At that point in his life, he was already quite successful by most people's definition of the term and had established several different companies over time, such as Penberthy Instrument Company and Penberthy Electromelt International. His education, career, and ambitions were multifaceted and included areas such as physics, chemistry, engineering, manufacturing, and obviously mountaineering safety. In 1991, 10 years before his passing, he held over 42 patents for numerous clever product and process developments, such as a method for electrical heating of molten glass furnaces that used molybdenum as an electrode, which he sold all over the world, a formula and process for a type of high lead content glass, which eventually became essential to nuclear reactor operation and widely used for radiation-shielded windows. According to Penberthy, the largest window he ever made was a 6-foot cube weighing 10 tons and was used for absorbing neutrons, a process for disposal of nuclear and hazardous wastes through vitrification into inert glass, and the world's first metal-shafted ice axes, which were far more consistent than wood, and the first remote burner liquid-fueled mountaineering stove, the Model 9. For these pioneering stoves, motivated through his interest in mountaineering safety, Larry applied his understanding of large, high-output glass-melting furnaces and scaled it down to a unit that was small and light enough to be easily carried in a backpack. This video is Chapter 2 of a special interview series I've put together with the help of Larry's 3 surviving daughters, Laura, Doris, and Louise, on Larry's life and achievements. For further interesting history on Larry and the early days of MSR, please make sure to check out my other videos in this series. Oh, and also, subscribe. It's free.
And we're back. All right. So Laura will probably remember this story. I don't know, Doris, if you ever heard it. So Laura and I grew up in a house on a street in West Seattle that was a curvy street. And as people came across a bridge, then they would turn to the right and start going downhill again. And our house was the fourth from the right. There was something about that turn that people would take it too fast, or it was badly designed. And sometimes cars would end up on our front lawn, or they would end up across the street and crashed into some other car. And as I recall, our father talked to the city, filed complaints with the city. He did everything he could. And finally, he said, this is a dangerous corner. People, I think at least one person died, and cars were wrecked and property damaged. And finally, as I recall, Laura, didn't you tell me one day we were on the bus, you said, so Papa sued. He sued the city of Seattle to get them to do something about that. And finally, they put in a series of arrows and reflecting lights, no, as reflective arrows, so people coming down the street could see that there was a turn coming up, a curve coming up. And then the accidents, I think, went way, way down. But that was his persistence, you know, again, seeing a problem, nobody will listen to me, so I'll get them to listen. And ultimately, I mean, his idea was right.
Do you have anything to add to that, Laura or Doris?
Got me to thinking about the house on Admiral Way, that things that he would do because he had a personal problem somehow, and how he fixed it was not exactly normal, maybe, wouldn't be expected by people. The 2 bedroom windows in the master bedroom faced Admiral Way, which, as we said, there was a lot of traffic on there. And he made, or had made, I'm not sure, window shutters that closed. And they were made of brick.
Oh, yeah.
And the point of that was when you closed the shutters and they were bricked off, then there wasn't that kind of street noise that came in. So I don't know anybody else in the world who's done that, but that it was something that he solved the problem. He saw that he could do it, and he didn't care what it was, that people made comments about it. The other thing I was thinking about is that he did a lot of traveling. Over the years, he did a lot of traveling. And when it was in the 1950s, when he was doing traveling, there was no such thing as all this wheeled luggage we have and all the stuff, that sort of fancy luggage we have. And he would take a regular size, a big suitcase, and have a suitcase manufacturer in Seattle add wheels to the bottom of it. This is long before
I'm going to leave. I think I have that
you-
original blue suitcase. Well, you
Yeah.
keep talking and I'll go look for it. Hang on.
So this is for
Be right
Josh's
back.
benefit then. But so it was a metal plate, and there are 4 wheels on it, and he had it fastened. The company fastened it securely to the bottom 2 places, and then he could put and a handle on the top, and he could pull them all around wherever he was. It didn't work well going upstairs, but at least on the flat he didn't have to carry the suitcase. And he even liked them so much he made me one when I went on the trip with him that ended up being mostly Africa, and so I had one too, and which I still have. But it's those kind of things that he would think of. This is a way to solve it. I don't care what other people think. This is the way to do it, and it works for me.
We do believe that he was the first person to put wheels on a suitcase. The story, as I heard it, as soon as Doris started talking about this, I thought, doesn't Louise actually have that suitcase? I believe, hopefully we'll see in a moment, I believe they are roller skate wheels.
Are they?
And he took roller skates apart and had the roller skates affixed to the bottom of a regular suitcase. There it is, the vintage blue suitcase.
Okay.
And now Louise will turn it around so that we can see the wheels on the bottom as affixed. Yeah, and then a little more towards the camera. There we go. Metal plates across the bottom of the suitcase and roller skate wheels.
When was that from, or what year do you think roughly?
Oh, in the early 50s.
Wow.
My memory is that he always had them, which means probably from age 6 or 8 on up that he had those. When we made it to Seattle, then he had that access to that luggage company.
Sorry, I took this to summer camp, and all the other girls made fun of me. But
Oh,
I feel like I've had the last laugh because now everybody has rolling luggage. One thing I think he said was that baggage handlers did. Maybe you all said this while I was looking for the suitcase, but baggage handlers wouldn't know how to deal with it, and the wheels would be torn off in the baggage handling system at airports.
Being an innovator, a lot of times people won't necessarily understand your vision. And as you mentioned, Laura, the naysayers. So with that, I would think there would be a lot of, not necessarily confrontation, but misunderstanding. So how did he handle stress, and how did he handle conflict resolution? Or, how would you describe that? Particularly being a business director of, Penberthy, Electromelt, and MSR, there's a lot on the line.
Partly he just kept talking
I think
his idea.
Yeah, he would just keep talking and if necessary, change the subject, but he would just keep going and maybe wouldn't admit that he needed to change directions, but he would just keep talking and then start talking about something else.
He wasn't a yeller or a real arguer.
No.
I don't remember that. If somebody mentioned he did have a soft speaking voice. I mean, he had a loud voice if he wanted to, but he generally spoke moderately softly. But I don't know, I was thinking, did he do any yelling? And I don't remember much of that,
No yelling. I don't remember yelling, but as for stress, I know that he really loved the outdoors.
Yes.
So climbing,
walking. He would
camping.
Even just go walking around the neighborhood just at a fast pace, and I think that was a stress reliever, partly. Yeah, and the climbing.
And camping. He liked, I know, he took our family camping. Did you all go camping, Doris?
Mm-hmm. A lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some backpack, as we got older, as I got older, we did backpacking even. And the one thing my brother and I did not catch on to was, our brother, was climbing, rock climbing, anything. That wasn't our thing. We did the outdoors, skiing and biking and hiking and backpacking and all that stuff, but not climbing. And I don't know if he was disappointed or not. I don't. The two of you don't climb either, But
I hike, but I don't do overnight
hiking.
climbs.
We do that kind of stuff.
That's kind of ironic then, like, founding MSR and no one in his family was necessarily as passionate, I guess.
But that's all right because it didn't bother him. He would just keep going on with his ideas. So
He just keep doing his,
whatever.
Do you have any specific memories of these, kind of family camping trips at the time, or some of the places you went, or specific times that stand out?
I remember something, Louise. Whether she wouldn't remember it because she probably was only about 2 or 3. We were camping, tent camping, and she was there. But I don't know if your mother was there or not. But there were several people out there, and I was grown by then, obviously, because you were born. But we were all lying in our sleeping bags, and everybody was sleeping, and Father Papa was sleeping in his manner, which meant he snored. And Louise, you did one thing. You suddenly sat up in bed and said, "Will you stop that noise?" And then you laid down and went back to sleep. And you were talking to him. Do you remember that?
Gosh, no.
I do. So I had to laugh for quite a while before I could go back to sleep. So it may, or it might have even been worse. Like, will you please shut up? That kind of.
Was he still mountaineering through these years, these decades, while he had a family?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
How did if you don't mind me asking, how did your mothers feel about that activity? Did they understand how, mountaineering is a risky endeavor?
He was mountain climbing before he met my mother. So she had to know that. I mean, he was up there in Holden and, went up Bonanza Peak and all these other places around there. So he was a mountain climber already. And when she met him, then that was sort of the way it was. Except that when they lived in Rochester, and then when we lived in West Virginia and even Spokane, there weren't too many mountains around. But by the time we moved to Seattle and I was six, then there was Mount Rainier, as Louise said, there it is right there. We can climb it, or I can climb it. To me, it was just the way life was.
Yeah.
I mean, and to my mother, I mean, that it was life, that's what his interest was, and she understood that. She had her own interest, which was music. She was a musician, so.
Do you have anything to add to that, Louise or Laura?
Yeah, Laura, I think for our mom it was the same.
Yeah, that's part of who he was, and she knew that from the very beginning. So Papa Father met his second wife, Alma, on a Seattle Mountaineers hike. So she had joined the Mountaineers to meet people in Seattle, having moved here from Ohio. And he was this big, strong leader on the hike. So that was just part of who he was. And he did continue mountaineering. I've often wondered if I were able to get access to, or even just the copies of the contents of the Mount Rainier Summit registers. Because of course, when you make it to the summit, you sign the summit registers. And I would just love to know how many times his name appears there, because he summited Mount Rainier so many times that he lost count. And after a while, when people asked him, he would just give the same number, and it was like 32 or something like that.
29.
29, yeah. So then people
29.
would ask, how many times have you summited Mount Rainier? And he'd say 29. But he continued to say 29 after he had summited it multiple more times. He would go to Mount Rainier with the intention of summiting Rainier regularly 2 or 3 or 4 times a summer during the regular established climbing season. And if the conditions weren't good, if the weather wasn't right, he had no problem turning around and coming home. So he has a couple of things that worked well for him. One is just probably good luck, because anything can happen in those kinds of conditions. But also, he was very pragmatic about his mountain climbing. And if the climb wasn't going well, he had no problem saying, okay, not this time, turning around and going back. And sometimes it's the people who say, well, this is my chance. I want to keep going. I have these reasons, whatever. When things are starting to not go well and they keep going, those are sometimes the people who really get in trouble. And that didn't happen for him. So I think our mother, whatever her comfort level was with him doing that high risk sport of mountaineering on Mount Rainier, she knew that if it wasn't going well, he would just say, oh, okay, well, I'll try again next month or something and come home. So it was to him, it was no loss to say, okay, not this time, and just go back home. And that probably saved him more than once from getting in trouble on Mount Rainier.
You know, I think I've thought over the years, wondered how he would feel about people paying guides and guide companies Everest attempt. Because I've read John Krakauer's book Into Thin Air, and I've read some other accounts of that same disaster, that same season. And I don't think he would be in favor of people paying guides and companies a lot of money to try to get up a mountain. I think he would favor people going who were prepared and well equipped.
Yes, exactly. Preparation, because Doris mentioned he'd go out and go for walks. From Admiral Way, a couple blocks up the hill from where we lived, is Stevens Street. And that section of Stevens Street is a notably steep hill. Yes, Louise and I know that from having to walk up it to go to school. But to go to junior high and high school, we walked up Stevens Street. He would go and walk up and down those two very steep blocks of Stevens Street on purpose for training. And all he would say is, I'm going to go do some hills. And he'd go out in an evening and go up and down those two blocks of Stevens Street, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, whatever. So
7. He used to say 7 was 1,000 feet of elevation gain and loss. So he'd do it 7 times.
Right. So we were fortunate from the Admiral Way house. There was a place he could go that was just 2 blocks away, that in 7 trips up and down a 2-block hill, he could do 1,000 feet of elevation gain. And that was a nice evening's workout for him. And he did that deliberately to stay in shape for mountain climbing. So yes, that would have been his preference, that people prepared, did easier peaks first, got the right gear. I think he would have been in favor of them having a climb leader or a climb guide, somebody who was familiar with the terrain, knew the route, those kinds of practical things. But there's a little bit of from that book and other people who have attempted to summit Everest. There's a little bit of a, I'm gonna pay someone to take me on this excursion, and we're gonna go achieve this goal. Well, by people who may or may not actually be prepared for the physical exertion that is required.
Yeah, but who have a lot of money and are willing to pay money to these guides.
I wanted to say one other thing that had to do with going to Mount Rainier. Many of the trips that I remember him taking to Rainier did not involve getting to the top. They involved doing something, trying out the whole MSR thing, trying out all the things that he was thinking about. It wasn't just that wasn't the only goal to get to the top. So like Laura said, and that's why it didn't matter to him if he couldn't make the top. He didn't need to. In his head, he didn't need to.
It sounds like then he had very perhaps conservative or just very sound judgment in that regard. I guess based on that note, what most important, or what are some of the greatest lessons that he and both of your parents taught you, and maybe lessons that they instilled in you that turned out to be true or accurate? Any ideas on those?
I think one thing that our dad taught me, and I think Laura, and I imagine Doris, is how to use tools. And it sounds really, maybe it's not the kind of grand thing you were thinking of, but I was in the snow one place and I put on my chains on my tires in the snow because he had taught me how to do that. I recently something got stuck in the catch of our dryer and the belt broke. So I got out my tools and to take up the dryer, and now of course you can YouTube anything, right? So there was somebody with a YouTube video of replacing a belt in almost exact same model of dryer. And whereas a longtime friends of mine, Laura's family, the Burts, I talked to one of them and they said, oh, just if it's old, just get rid of it. I thought, heck, this is old, but it's durable. Yeah. So I got out my tools and I replaced the belt and the dryer works again. That's one thing I really value is the practical skills that he taught me. When I was driving from Baltimore back to Seattle, when I moved back to Seattle again to marry my now husband, he sent one of his mountaineering stoves in the mail because I was leaving at the end of October. So if I got caught in my car on, I don't know, in the Rockies, I would have water with me and a pan and a stove, and I could make something warm for myself. It just seems I don't think most fathers would think of doing that, but it seemed perfectly natural to him. And I still have the stove.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Anyhow, Laura or Doris.
For me, it was the value of education.
Yes.
Because that was really stressed and really supported. I recognize that not every college student has, first of all, a mother who had a lot of education, bachelor's, master's, and PhD, and supported education, and a father who earned enough money to be able to say, okay, here you go, here's your college fund, here's, X thousands of dollars, and it's in this bank account for you, and you just transfer it to your checking account when you need some more, and there you go, off you go to college, and it's all paid for. That doesn't happen for everyone, but that was the case for me. And so the value of education was something that was very important and was very stressed.
When I was growing up, what was the deal about education? Did they say anything? And the answer was no, they didn't really say anything. They just expected it. And so we talked about, where do you think you might want to go to college? What do you want to, just the things that lead you in that path. So I did. And I went to college and went to graduate school. So we've all done these different things like that. The other thing I remember him saying is that even about education is get some skill that will allow you to get any kind of job, whether it's going to college. If you can't do that, maybe go to a technical college, or you just learn all the office skills, or you do something that that you can get a job even if it's not the one you want. Does that make sense? That learn how to type. Yeah, I don't know. I worked in his office for a couple summers, and I needed to know how to type just to be able for him to find the excuse that yes, she could work there.
When I started computer programming, being able to type was a big help.
Oh yeah. But it's learn a skill that will get you a job somehow, even if that's not your final goal.
Wow. It's really remarkable.
I had another story that I would like to tell about him, about something that we haven't talked about very much yet. But Laura will remember this as how she met Kyle, my now husband, when we were friends and he had moved out to Seattle. I was still in Baltimore, and I called up Laura's and my parents. Got my dad and said, "Can my friend Kyle come to Thanksgiving? He's just moved to Seattle and he doesn't have vacation to go back." And my dad said, "Okay." And I'm pretty sure he knew already then that Kyle's black and clearly I'm white, so in an interracial marriage. And I don't think that either of our parents, Laura's and mine, would have expected others to marry other than a white man. But eventually Kyle and I fell in love and got engaged. And I wrote a letter from Baltimore to our parents to say, Kyle and I are engaged to be married. And I hope, this, feel a little awkward about this because he's not white, but, and would you all agree that Papa Father never wrote social letters? I mean, he just didn't write. He wrote business correspondence, but he didn't write but he actually wrote. And all the years I lived away from Seattle, he barely ever wrote a letter. My mom and I. But he wrote a letter at that time, which I still have somewhere, and he was really nice about it. He said, we met Kyle as your friend, and we welcomed him into our family. We welcome him as your husband, and it was just not a.
That's nice, yeah.
And not as a big deal. And I remember when they first met, I was out in Seattle for high school reunion, and I think Laura, you and our mom were at French camp at Canoe Island. So it was just me and Papa and at the end of September. And so I said to Kyle, why don't you come over and we'll ride the ferry from Fauntleroy across Puget Sound to Southworth. It's something we like to do just for fun. Sit over there and talk or whatever, and then ride the ferry on back. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are they going to talk about? Well, my dad's an engineer, and my husband is a network administrator and software developer. And so they started talking, and they got on like a house of fire. And after a while, I was just sitting there like a lost puppy, like, oh, they don't need me. So they got along great. And of course, my dad had someone new to tell all his stories to. So he told all his theories about everything. He told them all to Kyle. Yeah.
Well, Louise, I thought you were going to tell a slightly different story, because when Louise asked, I've heard this story from both of you, I think, when Louise asked about the Thanksgiving, if he could come, and father-in-law almost said, yeah, sure, come. And then Laura, you were there, and I think you were married to Andrew at the time, maybe? Anyway.
Oh, and the furniture.
He got Andrew and Kyle to carry furniture up and down the stairs to the storage room underneath. And, welcome to my house. We'll feed you turkey.
Yeah,
move my furniture for me. Thank you.
And he didn't see it as anything weird. It was just practical. Here are these two, strong men. We have furniture. We just moved into this apartment. Let's get you to it. Kyle said it was weird. It certainly wasn't what his family would do. But at the same time, he felt more like a family member than a guest that my father would ask him. That our father would ask him to move furniture.
So, Josh, I don't know. Are we getting off track?
Oh, not at all. This is exactly what I was hoping would happen. Just things kind of evolve, and all these little details.
Can I tell a story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he had a very dry sense of humor, and he did like to tell jokes, and he did, he found things amusing. So he told us something that I never could finally decide, was it telling a joke or did he really do this? But because he traveled a lot, he'd go in 3-week segments throughout the year, and that was a lot of traveling. And on the airplane, you often had to wait for new planes and go. So he would be able to go to the lounges, and he didn't drink alcohol at all. I never knew him to drink. Anyway, so he said, one day he was bored because he had to be in one of these lounges for like 3 or 4 hours. So he took a selection of the little tiny bottles you get on the airplane, and he decided he would do a little experiment with those bottles. And he would keep track of, what the flavor was and how he liked it and how it affected him. And by the time he got to like the 4th or 5th bottle, everything was tasting really good. And so so I don't know if that's a joke or if that's. He never tell you that one? I don't know.
I do not remember hearing that one.
No.
I
didn't tell it more than once, so I don't know.
That does sound like something he would do if he had absolutely completely run out of other things to do and there was nothing else to experiment with. It would have been the miniatures. So that could very well have happened.
You had mentioned you'd joined him on some of his earlier business trips, from what I recall, Doris. Can you tell me what some of those were like in terms of just, it must have been an incredible experience seeing all these exotic places and particularly in that area. Do you have anything you'd like to elaborate on or share, or any of you that had joined in any of these travels at any point in time?
That was the only long trip I really took with him, but I was 19, I guess. I had a quarter off from university, and I was working in his office, and I kept saying, "When are you going to take me on a trip with you?" And he finally said, "Well, I'll take you this time." And I had some money that I could from my other grandparents that I could use to pay part, and he paid the rest of it. But then he said where he was going. I expected Europe because he's been to Europe a lot. And now he said, "No, well, yeah, we're going to Turkey and Sudan and Ethiopia and Kenya and some other place and South Africa." And, oh my gosh, I would never have gone there. But what I did discover, I think about him as a person and not my father, is to see him in social settings that involve these people in different countries and in business settings. And it was more like seeing him as an adult and not the father, and how he acted in those kinds of situations. We went to one thing that was pretty embarrassing to me in a way. The people in one of the countries, Sudan, I think, took us to Sudan's a very hot country, so they took us to a restaurant that was outside, and it was the evening, and it was sort of, as it turns out, a nightclub. So they had entertainment and dancers, and the women who were dancers were not wearing very many clothes. And that embarrassed me, but he was enjoying it. And I thought, okay, this is not my father. But who knows? It was, So. But it's the seeing him as an adult and not as the father. Plus, I saw many places that I would never have seen, and cultures that I would never have been exposed to at all. Anything in Africa, I would never have gone there. I never thought I would. I actually only was in really 2 countries in Europe. It was all these countries in Africa, and then I did go to Peru. So it was just, at 19, this was very interesting.
Yeah.